Cloud. Okay, so in Moodle, we are in week October 7th through October 13th to look for files that we're going to be using. And I think we'll download, I'll wait till my screen gets up there, but you'll download 4. And remember when you download files, so depending upon the browser that you're using, you can just view in folder and then copy it and paste it into documents. Then if we need to go back and forth to get them, they're easy to locate. So I'll do the same thing here when my screen gets to going. Everybody have a nice weekend? Catch up with homework, do anything fun? Worked.
Yeah.
Is that coming on? It's blinking red. I wonder what that means.
All the images, or is it just four?
We'll just do 4. So if you want to go ahead, this is really weird. The off light, it might have an issue. It's blinking like it doesn't know what to do. So go ahead and download while I'm trying to solve that problem. So download, it's called Selection Practice Clock Tower Image, Halloween Dog, Sunset 4, or Sunset Image with Cell Phone. I think either one will work fine. And then there's a pumpkin file. Okay. I wonder if there's a hard reset for this thing. It should download them. So then go. Oh yeah. So click on just like right there, and then go show in folder. Yeah. So rather than opening, do show in folder, and then just Control C, Control V into your area. On standby.
So my teacher this morning on the issue with she just got IT. I guess there was like
Oh, well, it was so weird because usually on the screen there, or on my deal, it says off is usually red. I think I might have to go run upstairs. I'll run really quick. I'm sorry, I just don't see that it's doing anything on the display.
Yes.
Suppose I should pause my recording.
Alrighty, so it's on now.
Okay, so you'll open clock tower, the sunset picture that you chose, and if you chose the cell phone one, I think it'll still be okay. Pumpkin, PSD, and then a picture. It's a picture of a Halloween dog. And I was going to go back to Moodle. So as far as Photoshop, Photoshop is a tool that's used for images, and they're the pixel, so the raster-based images. It's not a vector format such as Illustrator, but Photoshop it's kind of the standard, I guess, and there's free ones for sure. But used to edit photos, you can correct photos, you can color correct photos, you can layer all sorts of photos to make a unique collage. Green screening, I'm sure many of you have heard of the term green screening. So if you have an item that you're wanting to send somewhere, they tell you to put it behind a green screen background or plain screen background. You'll see why here in just a second. But that allows quick removal of any background of whatever's behind it. There's some fun blending modes. We'll get a chance to work with that. Some tone, I would say skin tone, human type corrections and natural enhancements, I would say. You'll kind of start to get a feel for how easy it is for people to manipulate photos. So you know how everybody has to watch for those now. And it's kind of fun too. Sometimes you can create something for a friend that, anyway. Okay, so we'll first start with the selections palette, and I'll go ahead and minimize Moodle there for a minute. So go to the clock tower photo, and just to introduce the screen, how many have had some Photoshop before? I know some of you that have been in my classes have had Photoshop. So I know that this is repeat, but again, I can't just skip over everything and assume everybody has the same knowledge. So you'll get one more opportunity to practice. So, and I know there's lots of ways to do things, as with many applications today. There's maybe 3 ways to do exactly the same thing. I tend to use my mouse clicks and such, just because, and then kind of traditional things that I can show you on screen rather than shortcuts, because you can't see what I'm doing if I'm using a shortcut. There are some common ones that we'll use, but in general, I try to use menu items. So for Photoshop, and these screens are so large that you can see one column here works okay. I can see all of my tools. I used to teach on the small square 1080s, and I couldn't see all the tools. So I've made myself used to, by force, but now habit, 2 columns. So if you like that view, you just click the little double-headed arrow that's right there. Any of the images, you'll see that they're on screen here. Some of them are a similar size, so the clock tower, and it's an RGB 8 channel, so 8-bit image, by the way. They're all the same, similar. 2 of them are 33%. I'll show you why in a minute. The pumpkin 66%, and the other image of the little Halloween dog is at 100%. So we'll determine why that is here in just a minute. Palettes, whatever I click, if I click, and you may see a rectangular marquee tool, but whatever I click here, your control palette is going to change. If you don't see your control palette, then be sure that you go to Window, and is Control down, or maybe it's Properties. You can also go to Window, Workspace, and then Essentials, or you could do Reset Essentials, and you'll get the little palette up at the top there. And then you've seen, I think, we been in here a little bit with this class? Not at all. So it was my other class. We were in and out a little bit. So there's layers at the bottom. So that's an important palette we'll deal with a lot. You'll also see channels and paths. Layers is forward. Does everybody see the layers palette? Way bottom. Okay, so that's important. A little bit about this layer itself. So it's called background. Every file is going to have a background layer. And the visibility is the eyeball, so that's on, off type deal. So it's visible, not visible. You'll also see a little chain link or a lock icon, and that means that the background is locked from certain types of editing. So you can see right here on the layers palette, there's what's called blending modes and opacity and fill. I don't have access to those. So there's things I can do. I can grab my little paintbrush, and I've got a pink color right there, and I can mess up my photo. So it's not that you can't mess up a photo. I'll Control Z. That's a typical Windows deal. Control Z is an undo. But there's certain, there is some protection for that background layer. Okay, so we'll go through all the tools here just so that you can, I don't know what that was. That was loud. So that we can get practice using the tools, the variations of the tools, and then understanding when and why you might want to use 2 or 3 tools at once. So if I wanted to, and back in the days when printing and graphics used to be on the mountain campus, I would oftentimes take my students over, and one day they were actually working on a photo that was very similar to that, not this one that I took, but they were sending out a thank you to the Foundation for donors, and they were taking something like this that had a blue background, removing the blue background, and then they put a fall background behind it. So it was like a big thank you. So I was like, cool, we actually do something like that. So it was nice to know that what we do is actually in practice. So we're going to use the square marquee tool. You're going to see there's a new selection square, top left, and an add to selection, subtract from selection, and intersect with selection. So a new selection, of course, we have nothing selected, so that's what we're doing. The add to selection, if I already have part of a document, part of a image selected, but I want to add a circular shape or something like that, then I can add to selection. If I have too much of something selected and I want to undo, I want to remove whatever I have selected, I can subtract from. Intersect with, I've really not used that. I think probably the best use I've seen, if you have 2 circles together, where they, if you draw them right or place them right, where they come together creates a perfect like half moon. So that's kind of where I've seen the best use, I guess, of intersect with. I'm sure there's probably better uses than that. But feather. So a 0 pixel feather is a hard edge. So feathering means that there's kind of a gradated edge. 0 pixels, hard edge. And by the way, to catch you up, you weren't here, right? You just got here? Okay. So in Moodle, you're going to see some files. And the clock tower, Halloween dog, sunset, one of them, and pumpkin. Remember how you download them and then show in folder, Control C, Control V to your, say, documents area. Open all 4 of them. Okay. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and try this selection tool. So if I wanted to just get kind of the clock tower, I can come to the top and go ahead and try this. Click and drag a little rectangle. So I'm kind of grabbing around that clock tower. Okay, and if I want to see, what this would look like, so if I draw my little rectangle, and again, you just kind of end wherever it's at. So click drag with your mouse. Control C as in copy. Control V as in victory. Yay, I did it. And then turn off the background visibility eyeball. So that's, remember the background one, that's your lowest layer. Turn that off, and that's exactly what we selected and copied and pasted. Okay, so that's a hard-edged selection, not a great selection of the clock tower, right? There's kind of a lot. If we had to deal with that, there's a lot to erase, and also there's a lot of it missing. So the clock tower part, you know, the building part is also missing too. So let's go ahead, and there's a couple of things you can do. Photoshop has a nice little feature called revert. So if I didn't save this, it reverts to the last saved version. So if I didn't save it, then I can just click File Revert, and it goes back to what it was. So that's pretty slick. And we'll try to, because we'll erase layers. I want you to know, other ways to remove things as well. All right, so the next one in the marquee tools, and by the way, the M, you could use your keyboard M to select those tools too, but again, like I said, I like to use the menu so that you can see. And then also that little corner triangle, there's a tiny little triangle. What that tells you is that there's more tools within. So if you click and hold your mouse, you're going to see a list of more tools. So the elliptical marquee tool is used for circular, oval, circular selections. And let's say we want to select that clock. If you do a Control+ on your keyboard, it should zoom in. And look at your percentage now. So I'm no longer looking at it at 33%, I'm at 50%. And I could even zoom in more. So Control+, you can even zoom in more. Okay, and to select so I'm selecting something round, and the most round thing here is the clock. So I'm going to go ahead, and you have to kind of start way top left, and you're not going to get a perfect selection, I'll tell you that right now. You might get close, but first of all, when I click and drag without a shift key, then I can click, and I'm going to Control D just to deselect again. So if I click and drag, I can get some weird oval shape, so it's not perfectly circular. So if I Control D that again, so Control D is deselect, is what that means. If I hold my shift key down on my keyboard, it doesn't matter how big the circle gets, whoa, except things are kind of swoo. It's a perfect circle. And the same thing with your square. If I need a perfectly square selection of whatever I'm doing, hold that shift key down. Okay, so I have a circle here, but when I took this photo, and it's my old Olympus camera from years ago, it was a really beautiful day on campus, and I decided that I would go and take a bunch of pictures so that I could use them for class. And I was down below, obviously, the clock tower is really tall, so the perspective on that, I'm not going to get a perfect circle because I was offset anyway. And we'll look at some transformation tools. But also buildings, you know how you think they're perfectly square, but the perspective changes depending upon where you're at? Well, there's tools in the program that you can change that perspective so that it makes a square building, or maybe even elongate something if you need to. So to transform this selection, you'll see Select on your menu. And as long as you have a selection, so if you did a Control D, for example, you might have to re-click and drag. But as long as you have a selection, you can transform. Now, notice there is a modify. So your initial instinct might go, oh yeah, I want to modify that selection. I can modify the border, like maybe add a pixel or something, stroke. I can smooth my selection, kind of a feathery type of look, or add feather. Or if I've had a click and drag selection that's kind of jaggedy and stuff, that would kind of help me out. Maybe I have a selection that I have to just expand a hair, like maybe 3 pixels, and it'll grow for me. Or contract. Again, I got it a little bit too big. I need to contract that down. But Transform gives you some other tools and lets you personalize or have more control on your selection. So as with any program, you know how you use like the corner handles, all those things to size things around. There's also a really nice skew tool. And if I hold my control key down on the keyboard, and usually you can go to a corner, but you can go to those little middle sizing handles as well. But it skews that. So remember, we started a selection that was perfectly circular, but the clock is not the clock face. So what we need to do is kind of skew it around a little bit. And again, do your best. It doesn't have to be perfect, but do your best. Get to what you think is the best selection. And again, control key on a corner, and that allows you to skew that circular selection, original selection. And then enter key, again, we used a 0 pixel feather, so that's a hard selection. So control C, control V, and you will see a tiny little image. So see the thumbnail on the layers? It's pretty small, but that's our clock face. So let's see how we did. And let's, again, the eyeball you can turn off. There's our selection. I can control plus. So I'm at 100% now. Is that a perfectly 100% clear image? No, not great. It's not bad, but it's not great. So there might have been a little camera shake. Anyway, and then the other kind of fun thing, so you actually have 2 clock faces. So let's go ahead and go to view, and you can either do fit on screen or zoom out to get back to normal, but view fit on screen at least gets it back down to where you can see the whole clock tower now. And if I turn my background back on again, you actually have 2 clock faces. So I can go to my move tool. The move tool is the 4-headed arrow, top left, and I can pick that up and move it around. I can make this clock face bigger. I could put it in another location. I can copy this and move it to another file to use elsewhere. All sorts of things you can do. And then I can label this too. So instead of it being labeled layer 1, I can call it clock face or something like that, whatever makes sense to me. So again, you just have to click on the words. If you need to reselect your selection, so there's some kind of nice things too. You'll see that there's load selection and save selection. Save is not active right now because I don't have anything to save, but I can so rather than trying to retrace what I did there, I can control click on the tiny thumbnail and my clock face re-highlights. So you have to really be on that little thumbnail. Control click on the tiny thumbnail. And then we won't save this selection, but if you work super hard, like University of Montana probably uses Monty in all sorts of different ways, and there's probably all sorts of different files, images of Monty, and they probably save those selections and put them all over marketing materials. So that would be way handy, save you time. So save selection, and then when you load selection, so there would be in the channels area, you would see that there was a selection there called clock face or Monty, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so let's say that we don't really need to have this. You can control D, by the way, that's just a deselect. Select, deselect is on your menu, and you see that it's control D. So that's exactly the same thing. Okay, so we can also, a couple of different ways to trash can that. I can click, hold that layer, drag it to the trash can, or be on the layer and trash can it. So what we'll do is just click, drag clock face, again to trash can, and it looks like a little garbage can. Lowest right icon, and it goes away. Some of these icons we will use, some of them we won't. The trash can is probably the most convenient, quickly, removes a layer. The one to the left of that is creating a new layer. And if I had my clock face and I wanted a bright green background for whatever reason, I could create a new layer, fill it with bright green, and then I've got a bright green clock tower or clock face. So anyway. All right, let's go back. There was 2 other tools that were in the marquee. There's a single row and a single column. The single row is truly 1 pixel all the way across. The single column is 1 pixel all the way down. If you wanted to, so it's a good way to create maybe a gradation of tone, and then you can fill that. So you can save a tiny file that's got the nice gradation, and then you just copy it. You allow it to multiply or copy horizontally, and then that creates, as large as your screen is, it creates that nice gradation background. So a lot of people use maybe the single row column for something like that. Okay, so far so good on that part of the selection. Okay, lasso tool, and it looks like a rope. And you may or may not see the first rope one, but let's click hold on that and try that. Okay, so lasso tool, and when you move into your document area, you see the point of the arrow, and then you see the lasso itself. I used to think the bottom of the rope was my little selection. It's the point of the arrow. It's a little clear. The tools have, in Photoshop, the tools have matured over time and changed a little bit. But you'll want to, this has to be a click, drag, connect back up. So what you'll need to want to, I guess, aim to do is start at a point that you know you're going to come and connect back up. Okay? So I'm going to start at the bottom, lowest part, and I'm just going to click and drag. And again, the selection on this tool is a little bit difficult, so don't spend an enormous amount of time, but I'm going to try to click and drag around that whole building. So we'll start at the bottom, and again, it's your control of the mouse, and don't worry about the little lamp things. And then you connect back up. And if you have trouble connecting back up, sometimes you can double click and it finds the end for you. So that's kind of a rough selection. Let's see how we did. Again, I can Control C to copy, Control V to paste, turn off my background visibility eyeball. And it's not bad. Again, I've got a shadow of blue around it, so it looks like it's a scissor kind of cut and paste, not very precise. Okay, so probably, again, not the best tool. Okay, trash can that, or what's the other way? Or file revert. Quick way to get rid of it. Okay, there's 2 other lasso tools, and I'd like you to try those too. So let's go to the polygonal lasso tool, second one down. And again, this is a little bit different. It's the point of the arrow. You begin at a certain place, but you know how as a kid you had connect the dots, you had to draw to a dot and connect. So this is similar to that in that you click and then you release your mouse, you move to a point where you want to draw, and then you click. So I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to click. I release my mouse, everything, I can kind of move it around. You can see I get this kind of straight side here. And then I go to where I think, and I could spend a lot of time. So again, don't spend a ton of time, but you'll get the point. So we'll go all the way around this little guy. And there's certain points that might be a little easier. You might notice. And connect back up. So when you get to where you feel pretty good about it, you've connected back up, Control C, Control V, turn off your visibility to see how you did, and you can zoom in. There's a couple of things that you can do. You can, Control plus to zoom in, There's a hand tool. I'm sure you've worked with hand tools in other programs. And you can click on that, pick up your image, move it around. Looks like there's certain areas that I did pretty well, and there's certain areas that I didn't do well at all. So my left side, my roof, maybe, but then things fell apart. But maybe better. So we can file revert this one again. So what tool would that be best for? Polygons, straight sides. So buildings that had squares, but probably more contemporary, or anything that had straight edges. Okay, so I'm gonna fit this in my screen again, so view and fit on screen if yours is large. The last one is magnetic lasso tool, and there's some settings on this one. So again, it's a new selection, 0 pixel feather. By the way, anti-alias is kind of a little bit of a smoothing of the edges. There's not a ton, but you'll see this has a width and a contrast and a frequency, so something that we've not seen in other tools. It looks similar to the other one, other than it has a little magnet. The pointy arrow part is where you're going to begin. The idea with this is that in a 10 pixel width, as you click and drag, this is a click and drag, not a point release click. In a 10 pixel width, it's going to look for a contrast of 10% and try to hug the edge, okay? So you'll see what's going to happen here. Again, I'm kind of starting at the same place. The idea here is that you're kind of supposed to be able to whip along. You know, not a I don't know, really super slow selection, that it's supposed to help you out. So let it try to do its job. Is that computer not working again?
No, that works. I just couldn't see what's, I couldn't see
Oh,
the selection.
would it help if I turned lights out here? Is that too dark? Is that better or too dark? Is it okay? Can you see that better? Okay. It's hard when you're at angles too, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so once you get your selection done here, Control C, Control V, take the eyeball off. And again, we can, you know, zoom in, Control plus a little bit to zoom in, move your hand, so grab the hand tool. So on the left-hand side, that's probably, you know, and I quickly went along. That's the most detail I think I've gotten out of any of my selections. So that's not bad, up here's not bad, but then I go and I start to cut off some of the little decorative spires, and it even gets worse here. Really good selection on my left roof. Cut off the lightning rod, if that's what that is. I assume that's what that is. Look at my tiles. I wonder why it cut off my tiles that bad. Then I keep going along again, the spire, and then look at how it ate into my building. That's kind of strange, huh? Then along the edge, did the same thing. Okay, so this tells us high contrast is best. Okay, let's go ahead and do a file revert, and I want you to, and then we can fit it in the window again. Fit it on screen. So if you go to image mode grayscale, so you can visibly with your eye, you can tell that that's a building, you can tell that that's a brilliant blue sky, and easily see the distinction between the sky and the building. But the application tool couldn't determine that. So we'll go to grayscale and we will discard the color. We'll go to image adjustments. We'll see that setting later and why it's telling us that, but let's go ahead and discard. So when I go to grayscale, it really does show me that, and these are just default grayscale settings, by the way. So if you go to image adjustments, black and white, you can manipulate all the color channels. So we'll go through that. But just with default grayscale settings, you can really truly see that there is a lot of detail that shows through on the left, I start to lose it though right here, don't I? It's kind of hard to even tell what's the spire color and what's the cloud or the blue sky color. Lots of good detail on the roof left side, but then I start losing it on the right. And then you can now see why that was so difficult to select on the right side, because it's almost the same color. So the tool is looking for high contrast and not in colors. It's grayscale. So anyway, let's file revert that back. And, or you can also, so you can edit undos, and it keeps quite a few undos. So it's just like any other program. Okay, so we've gone through the rectangle marquee, circular marquee tools. We've gone through the lasso tools. On the right-hand side, so it looks like either a quick selection or a paintbrush tool. So the quick selection is paintbrush, the magic wand, and again, they do kind of similar things here. We'll just pick the magic wand tool. What we'll do with that, so go ahead and select that one. And we'll do, again, new selection. It'll default to that anyway. But it says that there's different sample sizes. So there's a point sample that truly is a pixel. So when I move my mouse to a point on my screen and I click, it's looking at that pixel. If I have a 3x3 average, it's going to pick that square size, you know, 3 pixels or 31 or 101, whatever it is. But let's go ahead and choose point sample. I think that's going to be helpful for you to see what happens. The tolerance, let's go ahead and change that to, let's say 10. What the tolerance means is that if I click a color of blue, it's going to look for 10 pixels of shade or tone of that blue either way. So there's going to be, it's kind of almost like the 5x5, I guess, if you think of it that way. Anti-alias, again, is a little bit of that smoothing. And then contiguous, what that means is all the pixels have to touch. And if you look here, and if we were to zoom in, I don't think those pixels touch. I think that there's, because of the angle of that image, the detail of both of those buildings collide, and there's not going to be blue sky. So I think that truly is a separate section. Contiguous is kind of nice because, again, if you think of architectural images, you know how they have big, huge windows, and the beautiful blue sky with clouds is exactly replicated in the big, huge window. So if I unchecked contiguous and I wanted the blue sky selected or something, it's going to actually creep into that window and select that same blue color. So that's why the contiguous is even there as an option for you, and why it's most likely default selected. So then, and just so that we all kind of have the same experience here, I'm going to move my cursor to that top right-hand side and click. And what you're going to find is at that 10 pixel tolerance, so the 10 shade tones or whatever of this, whatever color point sample I clicked on, that's a pretty tiny selection. So it's selecting blue tones in that range, not a whole large amount of this document selected. Okay, so that's not going to work.
So mine won't select it.
Are you on the layer?
It's constructed with this.
Really?
So, like, I'll try to select it.
I wonder if it's behind or your internet connection is coming and going. It looks like it's okay now, but can you control D? It's not even moving. Like, see how mine are moving? I wonder if you've got like a connection issue. Yeah, I guess, and you've kind of gone through this, so. Yeah, but yeah, I bet you it's a connection thing. Okay, so then let's control D. So let's try 20 pixels tolerance. And move to the same approximate place, go ahead and click. So this is a much better selection. We're getting more of the clock tower, not a whole lot, but quite a bit more. And I can zoom in, Control plus, and move my hand around. What I want to get is a really tight selection of the building itself, but I don't want the selection to go inside the building or inside, say, the, you know how the spires were really closely colored, the match of tone. But you can see it's not really a great selection here. Pretty good, you know, and even on that left side, that's not super tight. Looks actually a little bit better, but you can probably see that there's some, so where you see breaks is not selected. So that is truly not a selected area. Along the right side is quite a bit worse than actually along the left side. So, I mean, better, but not there yet. So let's go ahead and view fit on screen. And Control D again. So let's change our tool again. So I have to go back, and because I clicked the hand, I need to go back and select my magic wand. So you may need to go back to that. So up at my palette here, I want to adjust my tolerance to 30. And again, we'll kind of click in that same section. So I still have, and we'll zoom in here to see this in just a minute, I still have that top right. So there's enough of a blue tone difference that top right's always going to be a problem, and as is the bottom lower side. And we'll add to our selection here in just a minute, but I want you to see that this is quite a bit better. So Control plus to move yourself in, and you can even roll your mouse around. You don't have to even grab the hand tool, but that's quite a bit better. It looks pretty good where that spire is. That might be an issue. My roof looks pretty good there. The tiles, quite a bit better on that right side. Again, quite a bit better on the right side. I still may have some issues here. That little contiguous, you know, non-contiguous area is a problem, as is the light tones at the bottom. So let's go view fit on screen again. And again, my same tool is selected here, but I need to now go to the second box on the top left. It's right under the word image, and it's add to selection. So we're happy with quite a bit of our selection, but we need to add to. So I'm going to go to that top right because that's a problem, and I'll just click near the area and it adds to. Then I can come to, you know, this was a little bit fuzzy. I might just want to click one more time to kind of clean that up on that lower right hand side. And I probably want to click inside the little block that's, you know, detached. And then I also want to come down to the lighter blue and just go ahead and click there. Now I know the trees are a problem, right? We knew that that was going to be a problem anyway. Okay, so what am I selecting? All the blue. So I'm selecting the sky. So if I want to select the building, I need to invert my selection. So that's kind of where green screen is really sweet, because you click once and that solid green is selected, and then you invert it and boom, you have your selection. So let's go to select, and then you should see inverse. And then Control C, Control V, and I think you're going to be pretty happy with this one. Let's turn the eyeball off. I'm going to Control plus just to zoom in a little bit, and I might grab my hand tool just because it's easier to move around. Okay, so we know the trees are an issue. We'll get rid of those here in just a minute. But in all of our selections, I've never seen that detail right there. Does that really matter? Maybe not, but maybe it does. If this was Architectural Digest, maybe it would matter. Okay, here we go along. No other selection gave me the lamp post, the light, right? Cruise along again. This may have come in there a little bit too much. That's a little skinny, but I can go paint that back in. Okay, so we'll work on that to paint that back in. I may have some shadow, and you could, so I'm at 100% right now. I can keep zooming in on this if I want to. So I could really kind of work at, you know, getting rid of some of this. I'll show you the tool to do that if you don't like that shadow behind it. My roof on the left-hand side looks really pretty good. I think I'm missing a little bit of shadow here. Again, I could paint that back in on the lightning rod. My tiles look pretty good. I've got a little bit of a shadow, but not bad. There's maybe some blue sky that's, you know, detail could be further enhanced if I remove a little bit of that blue sky inside there. And in the crook of, you know, the spire and the whatever that brown thing is, finial. I could get rid of that. There's quite a bit of shadow on the right-hand side, and I'm also actually seeing blue sky on that right-hand side. But it did pretty good, didn't it? Like, this is the best we've had so far. Okay, so let's go fix this right here. And again, these are, I want to show you how to use tools to heal things. Select things first of all, but then if you over-select, how do we fix it? So there's multiple tools that we'll learn to help you to heal images and make them look better. Again, this might be picky-uni, but depending upon where you work and what the image is going to be used for, and if it's a for print image, especially a large format for print, you probably are going to want to try to make this selection near perfect. Okay, so we want to paint that little bit in, so go ahead and zoom in so that you can see it pretty well. And then I want to go to my little paintbrush. So it actually looks like a paintbrush. Okay, the difference between the brush and the pencil is a thin, you know, like you typically see with a pencil. It's kind of a solid, thin little stroke, whereas the brush can be thicker. It can make shapes easier, thin, thick types of shapes. So that's kind of the brush. The color of the brush, so I happen to have pink because I was doing something else. You don't want pink, right? So let's go ahead and, do you see the foreground and the background colors? So we want to pick the foreground color because that's going to be your paint. So I'll go to my foreground. Now, wherever this is at, you can pick your color matcher up and color picker and move it around just like you would anything else, you know, the top bar. But when I move to my document area, you should see a tiny eyedropper. And I probably want to click my eyedropper near where that is at so that when I paint color on it, it's going to be a very similar tone. And actually, if you click around here, you're going to see that the tone is quite different. So just kind of practice clicking around. You can see, you know, there's darker, there's the white one. So you want to pick something that's, you know, quite close and maybe the deepness of color you feel like you want to draw. So once you're happy with your color, say okie dokie, then we have a brush size. So mine was left at 18. Again, my last project, whatever that is. So I want to make that smaller. And you might just have to kind of, you know, look at it, see what you think. So I'm guessing around 4 pixels. And the hardness, if I do a hardness of 0, that it's kind of opposite. You know, the 0 pixel feather was a hard edge. In this case, 0% hardness is a feathery edge. So if I want a hard edge, I need to go to 100%, like a physically straight edge. So 100%. And you can go 3 pixels, 4 pixels. I might even go 3 on that. Then you need to look at the opacity and the flow. So you know when you buy a brand new marker, you know the Sharpies? So a brand new Sharpie is super dark when you make it run across a page. Then the older that Sharpie gets, it's like you can barely get color out of it. So that's what the flow, basically flow and opacity are. I want, in my case, 100% color and 100% flow. I want it to be as dark as I can possibly get it with this color. So okay for that. And then you just come in here and I can do tiny clicks. I can click and drag. So however you fill that in, go ahead and fill it into what you think looks pretty good. And then we're done. So that can be done similar here. So let's say with this little spire thing, we're thinking we need to kind of add that shape, you know, continue it up so that I've got this shadow that's correct. So again, I can go to my eyedropper tool, eyedropper the color here, and might need it a little deeper. Okay, I might want 2 pixels. So maybe pretty small. Similar opacity, flow. And again, you can do tiny clicks. I can try to do a click and drag. Control Z if you don't like what you just did. And you can try to fill it in. You can zoom in if it helps. So again, something that's kind of close. Okay, so we kind of got our shadow there. And I think we're okay here. There's a little bit maybe I could erase here. So there's actually a tool that looks like an eraser head, pencil eraser head. And you can grab that tool. And last time I erased, it was pretty big, right? I got 161 pixel brush. I don't want that. Again, for tiny little erasings there, I might want like a 6 pixel brush. And do I want to erase 100% of what I have? Yep, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Do I want to erase at a hard edge, or do I want to erase at a softer edge? I might want to soften it just a little bit. So I'm just going to click, maybe 50, 60, something like that. Again, I'm just kind of ballparking. And then you can click and drag, but you can also do tiny little clicks if that helps. And then you can erase just the parts that you think are helpful. I can do the same thing, so I can move my cursor over here. Along this right-hand side, I probably will leave that. You could really work on that. That would take a while, but I think I'll go ahead and leave it now. I could erase, again, some of these, harder edges on that right-hand side. I want to leave a little bit. I want to leave some depth. But if it's too dark, then maybe I want to erase just a little bit. These guys in here, I really need a fairly small, maybe 3 pixel. And then I can come in here and provide more of that detail for that finial, and then a little bit more right there. The easiest part, and again, I can erase a little bit around that finial. The easiest part here is going to be erasing this color. So do you see the blue sky color along in here? So that one, that's going to be tougher. I might just go ahead and take care of that with the eraser. This one is tougher too. Kind of a good use for the eraser if you can click and drag, okay. So along in here, oops, Control Z. If you mistakenly click and drag like I just did Control Z. Remember the magic wand tool that we used? So go back and grab that magic wand tool, the one that we used to select the sky, and same tolerance setting. So right along my right-hand side there, do you see that skinny line there? I want to put the magic wand right on top of that skinny line, and you'll know if you get it or not. Go ahead and click, and it should select the skinny line. If it does, delete key on your keyboard, Control D to see if you like it. If you're happy with it, good to go. So you can kind of keep going, little parts. Delete key on your keyboard, Control D to get rid of it. And again, you can just kind of keep Control D. So delete, Control D. And that kind of brings out Control D when it doesn't select anything you're happy with. And I'll just do one more a little bit here. Delete key, Control D so that you can see. I Control D so that I can really kind of see what I just deleted. If I deleted too much, I need to edit undo, or Control Z's because I got rid of too much. Sometimes it is easy to get rid of too much. And then go back to your hand tool, and if you need to, fit it on screen or, zoom out a little bit, Control minus. But we have a really pretty good selection here, don't we? You can see my finial back. We removed a little bit of that hard edge. We've got a little bit left, but that's okay. Maintained our shadow at the top on the lightning rod. Got rid of the sky that was there. Looks pretty good. Okay, are you happy with yours? Right, so then I want to show you one more thing with the eraser, and just again, it's a demonstration of feather versus no feather and when it works and when it doesn't. So you already know how the eraser tool works, right? So go grab the eraser tool. we got to get rid of all the trees here. Now, if I have a 3-pixel eraser, it's going to take me forever to erase those. So that's where you want to go up to, you know, quite large, 100, 160, whatever you want to be at. And let's say, so I want you to see what it looks like, the difference between 0% hardness with erasing and 100% hardness with erasing, because you can use them to your advantage in both ways. If you have a 0% hardness and you erase, that's a pretty easy way to get a feathered edge. So it's click and drag. You're you know, selecting the feather edge yourself, but it's an easy way to do that. So let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So I've got a 0% hardness, and go ahead and get your screen. I'll move mine so that you can see it a little bit better. And I'm only going to click once just to demonstrate to you what happens. So if I'm starting at a point where I want to get rid of all the trees and stuff that's there, so I'm just going to click and release. And do you see what happened there? When I started clicking, because of that 100% feather, it's erasing into the building. Does that make sense? I'm creating a feathered edge on that building. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z what I just did. And then if I go, same size brush is okay, but I move it to 100% hardness, and I go to that same, and by the way, do you notice the brush gets larger? That's because of the feathering, really, the hardness of the brush. So again, if I go to the same thing and I click and release, I've not started to erase the building. Then it's really easy. Get rid of all that stuff. And view, fit on screen. And there's my really super good selection of the clock tower. So if you worked super hard at this, probably would want to save your selection. If you're going to use this building time and time again, you know where that's where you don't need to save it, but you know where that's at. I'd have to reselect it. Does anybody remember to save the selection? Does anybody remember how I can reselect this really easily? Remember the tiny thumbnail? Control click on the tiny thumbnail, and I've reselected my whole building. Okay, then I can save my selection, but again, we don't need to do that. So I'm going to Control D that. I'm going to leave, it's, I think, a good idea to leave your background picture in your image in case things go wrong. But it also allows me to use, if I really like that background blue for some reason, maybe for a different type of application for this photo, I can still use some of that background, if not all of it. So I just turn it off because I'm going to be doing some other things, but I usually leave that there. If you're concerned about changing the background in any way, so if you have to use the entire image, you're not really, you know, removing something, you can always so if you click on that background layer and then right mouse click, you can always duplicate the layer. So, and then just make sure you're not using, you know, one of them, and then it makes it a normal layer, and I'll talk about a normal layer here in just a minute too. So that's, again, if you're kind of worried about that, but okay. And then selecting on a layer, does it make sense that whether the eyeball is on or off? So there's a difference with the layer that I'm currently on, and if I want something to happen on layer 1, which is currently my building that I selected, I have to be on that layer. And it's that gray, that lighter gray tone. If I want to be on the background layer, I select and click on the background layer. So the visibility makes no difference. I can turn my visibility on, but if I really want to manipulate layer 1, I'm currently on the background, I'm not going to be manipulating layer 1. Okay, so that's the hardest thing I think for students to remember is, why won't it select? Why won't it do anything? Why do I get that Ghostbuster thing? It's because you're not on the layer. Okay, remember how when we were on the background layer, opacity and fill go away, the blending modes go away, so I don't have access to them. That's because there's certain things locked. When I go to layer 1, that's what's called a normal layer. Okay, so I have my tools. I have my blending modes. We'll get to those in just a minute. There's a whole bunch of them. I can adjust my opacity. So if I want this to be like 50% of my pixel color and I want something else behind it, I can do that. So if you're kind of doing and there's a channel, so channels later in the class, if I have time, I'll hope to get to that. But have you ever seen where there's like old to new, and there's an old photo that gradually changes to new, but there's like a blurring of the in-between part, you know, photo to photo. So that's what's, you can do a channel or a path there, actually the channel, and manipulate the opacity from that image only halfway out. So you can select the area that you want to change opacity with. Okay, so I think we did pretty good here. So sunset picture, still doing okay on time. So sunset picture, some of you might have used the cell phone one, and I don't know if there's similar issues, but I do want to show you. We'll have more experience with using the clone stamp tool, but in case you used one of them that doesn't have an issue like that, you can still kind of work with it. So you don't want to have anything on an image that leads your eye out or causes your viewer to go, what is that? Or why did they leave that little bit of pine tree in there? That looks pretty silly. So we want to remove this, but we need to remove it with something that looks like the picture. So go ahead and zoom in, again, Control+, and get yourself to where, you know, you can kind of visualize it here. And we'll just go ahead and correct this image and copy it and paste it over. It doesn't matter if we copied the whole thing and pasted it over to the clock tower, you know, as a layer in there, and then corrected it. Either way, we're fine. But we'll go ahead and do this here. So there is a stamp looking tool. It actually looks like an old time stamp. Okay, it's called the clone stamp tool, which is different than the pattern stamp tool. The pattern stamp, you can select you know, create a selection of a soccer ball and make a pattern to multiply that soccer ball everywhere. So you can kind of create your own patterns. Okay, so clone stamp tool, again, there's a brush size and a hardness that we'll select. So for me, I've got 17 pixel, not big enough to do much of anything. So I'm going to move that out maybe to about 80, something like that. Hardness, I'm going to show you what 100% hardness looks like here, so that, again, there's times that it works good for you to use 100% hardness brush, other times when it does not make any sense. The other thing that I want to do, so I'm looking at my opacity and my flow, and I do want to get rid of 100% of those little pine needles. So I don't want to just wipe them out 50% and see through it a little bit. I need 100%. So again, that's a determination that you make case by case. So the idea with this one is that you Alt key on a target group of pixels, and you click and release everything. So Alt, click and release where you want to borrow pixels from. I move my mouse over to where I want to paint, and I can click and drag down. Okay, so see what 100% did? 100% is not a good brush for clouds, because clouds are fluffy. Clouds have feather. Okay, so I need to Control Z that to undo what I just did. Okay, so I'm going to go back, and because clouds are pretty fluffy, I probably want to be kind of fairly low, you know, 30%, something like that. Again, I just kind of ballpark. And you can Alt click and paint little by little. You don't have to start, so if I start up here and I Alt click, you'll actually see a plus sign, and I'm pasting the same thing all the way down. And that's not often, I mean, it depends on the image that you have, but I don't know that that's the best application, so I'm going to Control Z that. What I might want to do is be kind of picky about where I Alt click. So maybe I've been a little bit more blue section there. Maybe there I'm okay. Maybe I want a little bit of color here. So again, you can kind of Alt click where you think you want the color to be changed, and then you can kind of do the same thing where you alt click all the way down. So your goal is to get rid of the pine cones or pine needles, and nobody knows that they were there. Okay, and there is a little bit at this bottom section, but this is going to be behind our building, and we've got a solid lower right side. Never going to see it, so we're okay there. And that's tiny anyway. I mean, I could super easy alt click, those are gone. Okay, so I'm going to view fit on screen again to see the whole thing. And again, I could use my selection tool, my rectangular selection tool, but just like Windows functions, Control A selects the whole window. So that's a super easy way to select the whole thing. Before we leave here, go to Image, Image Size. Image, Image Size. And again, if you use the cell phone image, it's going to be different. But I use the same picture, or same camera, same settings. So you're going to see that I've got a resolution of 72 pixels per inch. That's kind of web, you know, low quality average web. And then I've got a width of 1536 and a height of 2048. So this is a tall orientation, right? Portrait tall orientation. So cancel that. Go to your clock tower. Oh, and by the way, before we leave here, so we did a Control A to select everything. Let's do a Control C to copy. So I've got the copy ready. I'm going to move to clock tower, and before we do anything else, let's go to image, image size. And it's similar, right? 72 pixels per inch, the same height, 2048, same width, 1536. So image to image, that sky is going to fit in here. If I had, I'm going to cancel that. If my sunset was 200 pixels by 153 pixels, I have this, and it's also 72 pixels per inch, I'd have this little tiny box that I'm then trying to paste into the clock tower. It would fill up a little tiny box. And then I might try, if I didn't know better, I might try to spread that out and make it a really big sky. And that's when things start to pixelate and get really fuzzy looking. So you do have to, when you're looking image to image, there has to be some similarity in size. Now, the cell phone image, if it has a really large width and a smaller height, it still might work okay, and you might be able to stretch that out. It depends on what you're taking from one and into the other. So I guess that will depend. So at this point, since we had our selection and we've got on the clipboard the sky, go ahead and Control V, and it should come into your clock tower document.
How do you select that sky again?
So back to sunset or cell phone sunset, whatever, Control A. Now, if you had to Control D, if you had something else selected, sometimes you have to Control D because it still thinks you want to do something with the selection.
Okay.
So sometimes you do actually have to deselect whatever you had. Yeah, but then Control A, Control C to copy it. And then inside clock tower, then I Control V to paste it. Yep. Where did my clock tower go? Yeah, behind the image. So it didn't go anywhere, did it? Okay, just like any other application, you know how you can move things around. So these layers can be moved around and manipulated. So if I want to move my sky below my clock tower, the thing with this program is you'll see I've got kind of two double blue lines. You have to move it far enough. That's the other, you know, students will move things around and say, well, it's not going. But you kind of have to get it to the point where you see those blue lines. So it's low enough that it knows where to go. And again, I don't have to choose to keep, if I saved this photo without layer 2 on, it would save it as a transparent background. I always have these layers in here. So Monty, for example, again, that's kind of an easy example. Monty might have all sorts of, they got an image of Monty with all sorts of background so that they can turn something on or off and use it super quick immediately. companies might have that for company functions, for marketing. So again, the file gets bigger, but we all have big space, you know, on our computers and the cloud and all that good stuff now. Okay, so far so good on having a sunset layer-ish kind of a thing. Okay, so let's see, we're almost, I want to kind of let you look at the blending modes. Let's save what we've done right now just so that we don't lose anything. So go to File, and we probably have to go, I want to go to Save As just because I don't want to overstrike the other clock tower one. So File, Save As, and you can just go ahead and leave it in Documents. And let's do clock tower practice. So I might just do clock tower _ practice. And then I'm going to put fall 2019. And I'll just do 214 so that I know that this is my 214 class. So you can call it whatever you want, but clock tower practice, at least that changes the name from your other file. Okay, so save that. And you probably get the maximize compatibility, and you can leave that checked, but what this does is all of the Adobe applications, if you leave this checked, they're super easy to move amongst the other applications. So just say okay to that. And actually, I probably should stop. The blending modes are kind of fun. We'll come and practice with these later. But just to show you, so dissolve doesn't really do anything, but you can kind of roll your mouse down here. We'll pick one on Thursday. But there's darken and multiply, so we'll talk about each one of those. But if you wanted something to look kind of Halloween-y, they change. It definitely changes. So again, we'll save it at normal. So if you did a change of anything, go ahead and save. But this doesn't now go together, does it? So if that's a sunset, there should be a yellowy tone, a golden tone in the clock tower. This was taken during bright day, you know. The other thing you have to watch, and we'll see this with our pumpkin. So the shadows, it's really clear that my shadow is on the building on the left side of that building. If I put a pumpkin in here and my shadow's on the right side of the pumpkin, everybody's going to go, wait, that was pasted in there. So it just doesn't look real anymore. So anyway, we'll stop here. Be sure that you've got the little goblin there, goblin dog, in your drive area, as well as the pumpkin. Okay?
And one of my dogs used to have that exact same Halloween costume.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Years ago, so actually the web has kind of changed. You used to be able to get things so easily. Now everything is saved in that JGIF or whatever that weird format is, and so you have to kind of do some other things. But anyway, I have a folder called Halloween Dogs. This is the one where you can kind of see the whole dog, so we'll end up selecting around him. But they're really cute. There's ghosts, dogs with ghosts, and there's one that's a cell phone with, I think, some kind of spidery looking things. I don't know how they come up with all the costumes for the dogs. They're super cute though. One of them was Sarah Palin. So these were you can tell how long ago these Halloween dog photos were. Yeah, Sarah Palin was on one. It was hilarious. The Hulk. So they painted this dog. It was a bulldog, big, those big ones, hulky ones anyway. And they like painted or spray painted him all green, and he's they're pretty cute. Okay, so I'll stop the recording today. And again, if you need to go